Hi, I'm Leslie Omana-Beggart, co-founder of FabuLingua, and today I wanted to let you know a little bit about how FabuLingua got started at the very, very origins of it. Really starts on a day when I was in Caracas, Venezuela, visiting my grandma, and I'd taken my son to meet her and get to know our family there. And my cousin had come over one day, and she pulls me to the side, and she's like, Leslie, I can't believe that you're not speaking Spanish to your child. Like, you're completely depriving him of a massive opportunity to be bilingual and have the gift that you have. I think you're really dropping the ball. And uh, it was just a very timely message from her. And the fact is that she was totally right. I was dropping the ball. And I guess that in those early years where everything's a bit of a blur as a first-time parent, it just that priority fell by the wayside, and I really didn't follow up on that. I was just struggling to sort of keep my head above water. So I came back home from that trip to Venezuela, like fully, invigorated with the concept that, I was going to redress this wrong and I was going to give my kid this opportunity, and we were going to speak Spanish at home. My husband was fully on board. He's always been a big fan of my Latin background, and the only one who was not on board was my son. He's a normally very placid, lovely child, and his reaction was visceral. It was, no Spanish! And it became a battle. And eventually, anyone who's got toddlers knows that you pick your battles. And I was not going to engage in that one. It just became too hard. So at that point, I was stuck with, my goodness, did I mess up so severely that he's never going to have any Spanish in his life, despite having this privilege of having a Spanish-speaking parent? And at that point, I remembered my own experience when I'd gone to French kindergarten when I was living in Spain, and I was like, you know what? Even though my parents didn't speak French to me, and even though it was only a 1-year experience, when it had been that early exposure as a child had become a tool in my tool chest that I'd been able to access as a teenager when I did want to formally study French. So I was like, maybe he won't be a fluent speaker, but I'm sure I can do something to give him a leg up in the same way I had a leg up with French, with Spanish, should he choose to ever, embark on that later on in life. So I was like, what can I do? And I looked at apps, I looked at, various kind of DVD programs and stuff like that. And the truth of the matter is that, to me, as a native Spanish speaker, they all felt very token and quite superficial. I wanted him to learn way more than the colors and the numbers and these sort of little intro things. I really wanted him to just have a concept of the structure of the language. So I thought about it long and hard, and eventually I was like, how about we just start with something easy? I read a lot with my kid. It's one of my favorite things to do as a parent. I consider it a massive privilege to sit with a child on your lap and just dive into a beautifully illustrated book. And I was like, let's do that in Spanish. So I started off with bilingual books where there was paragraph in Spanish and then that same paragraph in English. And that really didn't work for us. He basically just ignored the Spanish and waited for me to read the English page. So eventually I was like, this isn't really moving the needle. So we moved to just Spanish books. And I started off just reading Spanish books to him. And it became clear really uncomfortable for him because he had no idea what I was talking about. And it was only when I kind of put myself in the scenario where I was thinking about it, like, what if somebody was sitting down and reading a Russian book to me? And I don't speak a word of Russian. That would not be a pleasant, fun experience. So, eventually, in trying to rescue this situation, I started drawing on my personal experience with simultaneous translations that I had had back in college when I was doing these anthropological expeditions to very remote parts of South America. And I had developed what is a simultaneous translation like muscle memory. It's something that once you've kind of engaged in, it kind of stays with you for life. And I just started doing that sort of simultaneous translation with the written text. And amazingly, suddenly he was interested. instead of squirming around and this becoming like an unpleasant thing that I was kind of trying to rope him onto my lap and he was not comfortable, suddenly in his mind, he was just hearing a story. And he didn't even know what language he was hearing a story in. He was just happy to sit there and listen to the story. And so we developed over time. I kind of had my little feedback mechanism in person right next to me. You know, when the translation phrases were too long, he'd kind of get disinterested and he'd wander off. When they were too short, he didn't seem to follow the flow. And so I titrated to him and to his age and to his proficiency, and came up with just sort of, I would be able to do these translations on the fly. And really the interesting thing was that I wished, you know, at the time I had these grand plans that I was going to do this super frequently, and this was going to be like the foundational basis for his Spanish. And the truth is that, again, you know, just parent, you just don't have time for all your ideal plans, and I didn't get to it as much as I wanted to. But the really interesting thing that was that despite not doing it as much as we wanted to, I did do it consistently. And when he got to his little Spanish classes that they had at his little Montessori school, it was kind of interesting that his capacity to learn, his like learning curve was so much steeper. He learned at a much faster rate than his little friends who'd not had that same amount of exposure to Spanish children's books. It was almost as if the lessons he was getting at school in Spanish were falling on fertile ground, and things were blooming just with one say. You know, he'd read a book about a little yellow bird, so he didn't need to hear the word amarillo 20,000 times to know that, yeah, amarillo is yellow. And so he was ready to move on to the next thing, and he was hungry for more. And considering that I hadn't done it as much as I had hoped, I realized it was a strangely efficient thing, that reading a lot to a kid in that second language in a way that they understand what you're reading to them, that is really efficient. And I then, of course, realized that it's actually a very similar process to why reading a lot to a kid in their native language gives them a much better command of their own language. You know, you're training the eye on the written word even before you read, and that's helping your brain wire to that language. And the fact is that if it helps to read a lot in your native language, to acquire your native language in a much more proficient way, the same thing is true for a second language. Reading a lot in a way in which you understand what you're reading really helps acquire a second language. So I kind of, you know, realized that, you know, people are like, how do I teach a child a second language? You know, and I'd get that question, and I had started to see that really it's about reading a lot to them in that second language. And honestly, the more, the better. It's just like a linear relationship. So fast forward to my second child. I now know it's very efficient, and so I'm doing this much more with her. She's got the benefit of me having experimented on the older one. And I have this one day where I remember it was like it was yesterday. It was 5 p.m. I had 1,000 emails to get back to for work and various things, and then I was in the middle of doing this translation methodology with her, with this book, this system we had, and dinner needed to be made at the same time, and it was just one of those moments that I was just like, I need to clone myself. I need to just make another Leslie so that we can get all of this stuff done. And at that moment, I was like, yeah, but I can't clone myself because no one's going to write my emails the way I need them written. And I don't have a robot that's going to come make me dinner yet. But this reading thing that I'm doing with my child, this should be something that I should be able to use technology to help me out. And so that she can get much more exposure than what I'm able to give to her, because I have 24 hours in a day, and I have, you know, a limited amount of time with her to do this. And if she could hear it way more often, that would be so much better for her. So that's really where this all started. And that same afternoon, I got online, I got on the App Store, and I was looking around for something that would do this for me, so it would solve my problem with my child. And I found nothing. So I was like, well, someone's surely making it. And I waited another 6 months, and no one was making it. So in the end, I was like, maybe I need to make it. I know exactly what I want, so I'll make it.